enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe so you'll be notified of all future uploads, and check the description box below the video for important links and information. What's up, guys? This is Eric from RuleTheWasteland.com. This video is going to be about the deadly coronavirus. Something that a lot of people, especially in the prepper community, obviously have been talking about lately. Don't have any coronas to commemorate the occasion, but I do have this tasty White Claw. Completely different. Although I did talk to a family member in law enforcement, and he did confirm that there are, in fact, no laws when you're drinking claws. But this video is about the coronavirus outbreak in China. It's obviously, at least in my mind, a lot worse than the official numbers that are being put out. For people who doubt that, before I get into what this video is specifically about, for people who doubt that the numbers aren't actually worse, all I would ask them is, do you think that China, of all places, first of all, any government, but specifically China, would put out the completely legitimate numbers if it made them look bad or made them look like they didn't have control of something? So obviously the numbers are either correct or they're worse. If you think that they would ever change numbers for any reason, they obviously have reason to. And we've seen reports sneak out. None of this has been verified, but if even half the stuff that has come out is true about what's really going on there, it is much, much worse. We're talking, instead of the 800 or 900 dead that they say, possibly anywhere from 10 to 50,000 people dead, which makes sense just based on what they're doing. Locking down cities bigger than New York City, multiple cities, tens of millions of people on like complete quarantine, people being literally dragged away to go into quarantine, 1,000 bed hospitals with basically circus tents with a bunch of beds in them, overnight built, basically spraying streets with whatever kind of disinfectant they have. So this thing is definitely worse than is being let out. Does that mean that it's going to be a problem here in the United States or in other Western countries? I don't know. It certainly could be. There's some evidence to suggest that it may hit Asians, and specifically Asian males, more severely than white people or other races, simply because of a certain receptor in the lungs. Haven't confirmed that yet, but it's pretty interesting. And but it certainly has escaped China already. It's in multiple different countries, including the U.S. It just hasn't got that serious outside of China yet, but it certainly could. And there's 3 specific reasons why I'm a little bit worried about the chances of it getting considerably worse. The first reason is the high level of complications involved among the various people who contract this virus. So obviously, for those of you who don't really know, it's basically a flu type virus. It has a much higher death rate, but still not that high. It's very contagious, much more so than the normal flu. Anywhere from each infected person, I'm sure you've heard a lot about the R0 number. That's basically just a number that's used to designate how many people an infected person can expect to infect themselves. So like the multiplier, basically. So something for like the flu, it's just over 1. If it's less than 1, the disease eventually dies out, but just over 1 for flu viruses. The coronavirus is anywhere from like 2 to up to 4, which is huge when you start talking about multiplying. 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, that sort of thing. Those numbers get stupid really quick. And so that's really high. The death rate is still not that high. So even if you look at some people have absurd numbers, I mean, maybe they're not absurd, but shocking numbers of anywhere from multiple percents up to 10%, is still not like an Ebola or something like that. Like even if 10% of people, which would be incredibly high for a virus like this, but even if 10% of people get it, it's that's still 90% of people are going to recover. So chances are pretty good, especially if you're not old or otherwise infirm. But the dangerous thing about this one is the incredibly high rate of serious complications, somewhere around 20%. So of all the people who get it, even if only 2 to 10% or whatever die, which would still be very, very high, something like 20, 25% maybe will involve serious care, which that death rate could go up if there's not beds or hospital treatment available to those people. And it also, from a prepping perspective, and this is basically one of the reasons why a pandemic of this kind, that's not something that's super, super, super deadly, but the risks of a pandemic like this are not necessarily that many people will die, but think of what happens if 1 million people get infected in the U.S. Not only are 200,000 of them going to basically be needing emergency room type care, but think of how that's going to change behavior across the whole country. Nobody's going to go out and do anything. There's going to be all sorts of panic buying of all sorts of other things. It's going to shut down lots of economic activity. So just the ability to be able to last on your own without going out and doing anything is huge. And that's normal preparation type stuff. So that high risk of serious complications is one of the things that's pretty worrisome. Second thing is actually kind of worse, and this has not yet been confirmed, if I'm not mistaken. I've seen reports of this. It's rumored, not yet been confirmed, is that there's a potential, at least, for people who have become infected with the virus, recovered, that it doesn't actually confer long-term immunity. That antibodies may fade, and you actually have the ability to get sick with the virus again. If that's true, it's incredibly dangerous because it means that it could potentially fester in a population for much, much longer than a similar virus that did confer immunity. So hopefully that's not actually true, but it is something that I've heard. Now, the third reason, which actually the most worrisome traits of this virus, and is the thing that we should most keep our eye on, actually has been confirmed, is that this virus has a particularly long incubation period, or not very long, but a long incubation period, and it has the ability to be transmitted when you're asymptomatic. So that means when you hear about them testing people for temperature at the airports and things like that, there's actually no way, aside from an actual like blood test or swabs and things like a literal test, to determine if someone has this thing, and they could still be contagious even before they actually get any symptoms. So then this thing can spread incredibly, fast and far before you even know. You're always going to be like 2 weeks behind because those people have been sick for maybe a week or so, spreading it for part of that time before you even know that they're sick. And then by the time you figure out they're sick and retracing their steps, all those other people have been infected. So that's why I think we have been seeing these numbers spike up. It could get really worse. And I think the next month or so is really going to tell us where this thing is at. If it's really being contained mostly within China, and they're doing some pretty draconian containment measures, which are pretty much necessary if you actually want. I mean, morality aside, if you just looking at the logistics of it, that's what you would have to do, is stuff like that to be able to contain something like this. So for those of you who are already preppers like myself, you should have a few of the things necessary to prepare for such an event, because of like what Jack Spirko calls a commonality of disaster. I really can't talk today. That a lot of the preparations you would have for any disaster come in handy for every disaster. Now, obviously, there's a few specific, pandemic-related preparations that you would want to have on hand, and you should already have those, because right now, some things like the I've got them down here, Sam. The N95 masks, flu masks, whatever you want to call it, are basically impossible to get, or very, very difficult to get, at least at any reasonable price. I actually don't have that many. I think I only have about like 25 or so, which, that's a hole in my preparations. That's enough for the time being. If it gets really serious here, maybe it's not enough. And simple things like, I know Chris Martinson from Peak Prosperity, I've talked about his stuff way back for years and years. He actually has a background in some kind of epidemiology or something related to disease. And he's been doing some great videos on this. He's a little spooked by how serious this is too. But he mentioned specifically stuff like elderberry syrup, which is clinically been, or studies have shown it to be basically as effective as Tamiflu at reducing the severity of symptoms, and for flus and things like that. It doesn't help, doesn't do anything to prevent you from getting it, but if you start taking it at the onset of the symptoms, whether or not you have coronavirus or just anything else, it can severely reduce the severity. And the stuff isn't super cheap. I think it's like 15, 20 bucks for a little vial, but it's still available. It's not something a lot of people know about, so if you don't have any, you can still go out and get that right now. Like I've mentioned, that something like a huge pandemic, even if it's not incredibly deadly, can, in a percentage-based term, can change behaviors in ways that would make, a lot of problems if you don't have supplies ahead of time. So simple things like just medicine, cough syrup, NyQuil, stuff like that can help reduce, fever reduces, like acetaminophen. All the stuff that you would need for a normal flu season, for being sick, for any pandemic, that stuff is going to be really hard to come by if it starts spreading badly in your own country, whether you're in the US like me or anywhere else. So now's the time to get that stuff. You're going to use it eventually anyway. A few extra bottles set aside, a few extra packs of latex or nitrile gloves, stuff like that. You can use this for everything. Super cheap. If you're a prepper, you should have most of that stuff anyway. And yeah, that'll help you a great deal. I'll put links in the description to some of the stuff that I have, but this stuff's pretty universal. Just keep in mind that the biggest issue is, when you're talking about not contracting a disease like this, is contact. There is some rumors that it might be transmittable by aerosol. It's airborne, as they say in the movies. But if you're not in close contact with infected people, and you're not touching your eyes, your mouth, your food, that's the biggest thing, because this virus can survive, it says, maybe up to 9 days on surfaces, but even if it's just a few hours, then just touching things and then touching your face or your food, that's the most likely way that you'll get transmitted for something like that. So if you avoid, that's one of the best reasons. I think Chris Martenson mentioned this in one of his most recent videos. That's actually what helps with these masks and with gloves, is it actually just stops you from touching your own mouth and your face. Not so much that it really is filtering the air all that effectively, but that does help too. And it also helps if you talk about the asymptomatic phase, having everyone wear these. If they have become infected, it stops them from spreading it. So that's important too. Let me know what you guys think, if you've done any specific preparations, or if you're kind of squared away already, or if you have any holes in your preps. Like I mentioned, this is not an area where I have a huge abundance of preparation, but it is something I've got the basics covered, which I'm happy and proud of that. And hopefully it won't be necessary, but if it is, like I said, we can at least take comfort in the fact that this is not yet an incredibly, deadly in terms of percentage rate disease. So if you got your health squared away, you got basic preparations, stuff to the side to help with the symptoms before there's any potential runs on all that stuff, should be in a good place, especially if you have the ability to not leave your house for a week or two. For preppers, that shouldn't be an issue, but that could help you too. Because if it really starts spreading in your area, just not going out and not interacting with people could be a big deal. Oh, and you forgot the one most important thing to help you survive any massive shit-the-fan scenario. It's a Rule of the Wasteland Survival Fishing Kit, link in the description.